Hey y'all, welcome back again to another episode of Healthy Design. I thought today we'd start a series talking about insulin and insulin resistance. It's pretty common, and it definitely plays a part, or is at least a risk factor for a lot of the different diseases that we face and health issues that we face. Um, Depending on, I guess, where you look, you'll see that 50% of adults in the United States have insulin resistance. Some of those numbers can go up to 88%. Um, Dr. Kraft came up with a glucose tolerance test that also looks at insulin. And I definitely going by his numbers. I think it's up there closer to 88% of people are diabetic and have insulin resistance. Um, so part of the problem we have is a lot of times doctors are just looking at glucose and fasting glucose levels, which is a great test, but sometimes it doesn't tell us that there's an issue until there's been an issue for a long time. So one way we can kind of find this a little bit earlier is to just do a fasting insulin test. It's just a blood test, the same way you get your blood sugar checked. Now they don't have any at home weight, test kits or anything to do that. At least not that I know of. Not on a regular basis, like you have a glucometer. But by checking fasting insulin and fasting glucose, then we can get a better idea of what's going on and if insulin resistance is present, and we can also catch diabetes like years earlier. So that's one good thing about it. Um, just a little bit with the testing. You have to, I guess you could have kind of three different categories come up. Both the blood sugar and the insulin levels are in the optimal range, then there's not an issue. If both of them are outside of the optimal range, so like blood sugar is high and insulin levels are really high, then we know there's insulin resistance there. But it is possible where you could have glucose, so their blood sugar, in a where it's not too high, or even maybe it's still in that optimal range, but their insulin levels are high, and that's not a good thing. It may seem like it's a good thing because their blood sugar's good, and the insulin may not be crazy high. It may just be towards the high end of optimal, or just outside of that. So it may seem okay, but it may not be too, because what that could mean is that yes, their blood sugar is great, but their insulin, instead of being in that optimal range to keep it great, it has to be up here to keep it great. And if that continues, it's probably going to keep going up, and then the blood sugar is going to finally start going up too. Um, we don't want that. So, all right, you got a little bit about that, but let's back up. What is insulin? Insulin is a hormone. Most people, refer to it as a storage hormone. So it's released in response to blood sugar. If our blood sugar levels go up, insulin will be released to get some of that blood sugar out of our blood. So get that sugar out of the blood into the cells. And so it will try to store it. It can store it in muscle as glycogen. Um, and then it can also get stored as fat in the fat cells. And so they can be stored in liver and different things too for glycogen as well. Um, but the problem with hormones is that in general, most hormones are meant to spike and then come back down, spike when needed, come back down. And the way we eat a lot of times for insulin, it gets spiked and it stays up. So insulin levels are going to spike in response to any meal that you eat. The more carbohydrates, the more sugar in the meal, then the higher that spike's going to be. But you will get a small spike with even just consuming fat or protein. Again, it's going to be much smaller with those versus the carbohydrates, but you do get a spike at any point. Um, that's why a lot of times I'll do the walking in the morning before I eat anything. There's going to be little to no insulin there because I haven't eaten anything since the night before, and then that should help lead to burning a little bit more body fat and for energy during that walk, and help out just a little bit with fat loss. Now, is that going to be some huge difference versus doing it later in the day? No, but it just can help maximize things as much as possible. So that's part of the reason why people do that. Um, so that's what insulin is. It's a hormone. It should spike at different times, but it should go back down. If it stays elevated for a while, then that's going to be a problem. So one other thing too to keep in mind, insulin affects every cell in our body. It helps tell the cell kind of what to do as far as energy production goes, because it will bring in, fat. It'll bring in. It doesn't just store the blood sugar. So um, we know too, like a lot of times bodybuilders, people who exercise, they want to take advantage of insulin like after working out. So they'll have carbohydrates and protein. The body's going to has burned some of that muscle glycogen for energy, and so it's going to try to replenish that. So the carbs will be shuttled more so towards refilling those glycogen stores rather than being shuttled to filling fat stores. And then also it'll take some of the amino acids from the protein after working out and put it in the muscles to help them rebuild, repair. And so that's part of the reason people do that. So it doesn't just store blood sugar; it can help store anything fat. Amino acids drive things where they need to be. So kind of helps out on the energy regulation side of cells. Can help cells gain size, and then it can also have an impact on cells producing other hormones. And there's many other things insulin can do as well. So it's like I said, it affects every cell, so it's pretty important. So what exactly is insulin resistance? Um, when you keep having that insulin, so since insulin's telling the cells what to do, it's going to keep telling the cell what to do. If your insulin levels are high, then it's like instead of just asking the cell what to do, it starts yelling at the cell what to do. So maybe initially insulin could release this much and the cell did what it wanted to do, but now the cell's getting tired of hearing that, so it takes this much insulin to get the cell to do what it wants to do. The cell gets tired of hearing that, now it takes this much. So basically it's just that the cell's kind of getting bombarded by this signal, and after a while it takes more of that signal to get the same output or the same effect. Um, so that's what insulin resistance is. Um, and that's why, again, we kind of want that pulsatile nature where it goes up and comes back down. We just don't want it staying up all the time. And so that's where your diet can play a part, but there's other things that can play a part too. Like we said, there's got to be storage different places. If all those storage sites are full, we're starting to have more and more problems. We definitely know that insulin resistance is involved with a lot of different chronic diseases. So as we continue this video series, we'll go down basically throughout the whole body and just the impact it can have there. Today we'll finish up by kind of the correlation or the impact insulin resistance has on heart disease. So there's different studies showing that insulin levels can have an impact with cardiomyopathy. That's just where there's different issues with the muscle of the heart. So there's kind of more of this restrictive cardiomyopathy. That's where the heart muscle gets scarred, and so then it can't expand very much or stretch when when blood comes in, and then it can't contract well too to pump the blood out. There's a dilated cardiomyopathy, and that's where like the stretch part, it's kind of gotten so stretched out now that it can't contract very well. And then there's a hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, and that's where the muscle itself has kind of gotten too big. Having some hypertrophy of our heart is a good thing as long as we do things the right way, using the right heart rate ranges, different things like that. This type of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy is not a good thing. It's like it's kind of gotten so much muscle that it can't pump well, it can't stretch very well to let it in. And so I don't know that they've necessarily identified exactly why that happens. Again, insulin can play a part in hypertrophy, so maybe those increased levels are leading to some of that. We also know that really, according to Dr. Ben Bickman, he says that heart disease is inseparable from insulin resistance. I did a series with cholesterol, I don't know, a few weeks ago, months ago, and we talked a little bit about insulin resistance and LDL. Like with a lot of studies, LDL doesn't seem to play much of any role at all with plaques and heart disease, but when insulin resistance is present, it does. I don't To me, that doesn't mean that the LDL is the issue. It just means that insulin resistance is the issue, because like when you have insulin resistance, your risk for all these different disease processes goes up. So that seems to be the bigger issue. Whereas if insulin resistance isn't there, the LDL doesn't matter. So to me, I don't think it matters when insulin resistance is present. I just think the insulin resistance is the issue. You fix that, and LDL will take care of itself, and other things will take care of itself. Um, so what let's go back to some testing. So the tests that I do think are kind of better to give us an idea about heart disease and other things are a lot of the inflammation markers. CRP, so high sensitivity C-reactive protein, that's been shown to be a much better marker of heart disease than cholesterol. I do like the cholesterol panel, not so much for the cholesterol itself, but the information it can give us related to metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance. Um, Another one I like too is homocysteine, and then we already talked about the fasting blood sugar, fasting glucose and fasting insulin. I think those can give us a lot of good information on things. Um, so part of the way insulin resistance can contribute to heart disease, if we're insulin sensitive, so we're still sensitive to that input coming in, so it doesn't take a whole lot of insulin to accomplish the goal, then insulin can actually be anti-inflammatory. However, if our insulin levels are up and insulin resistance is present, now insulin becomes inflammatory. Um, and so inflammation means there's going to be more problems. That's not a good thing. Inflammation by itself is a good thing, part of healing and stuff like that. So again, we kind of want that spike, that acute inflammation, then it go away. But it's when we kind of have this level that stays for a long time, that's when inflammation becomes problematic. Um, that inflammation could lead to damage of the blood vessels. The insulin, resistance, so high insulin levels being present, can actually lead to hypertrophy of that inner wall of the blood vessel. And so, we have, let's say we have a vessel that's this, wide, but if we get hypertrophy on this inner wall, well, then it's kind of like that vessel starting to shrink or constrict. Um, so we don't really want that, because we will still have the same amount of fluid going through. So if we have X amount of fluid going through this, that pressure is not going to be too bad. If we start shrinking that blood vessel down and have that same amount of fluid, same volume going through, well, the pressure is going to be up. And so that's blood pressure and things. The other things with increased insulin, it can actually activate the sympathetic nervous system. And so that's that fight or flight response. So that is higher heart rate. You do get some increase in blood pressure and things from that as well. All that's a normal response. It's helping us to deal with the stress, to either run away from it or fight something off. So that response is normal. But again, if it's kind of kicking in all the time and never going away, then that can become more problematic. So that can also increase blood pressure. Um, the So we've got several different things where insulin is kind of leading to these issues. There's Insulin can also have an impact on aldosterone, which can impact blood volume, and so that can again lead to increased blood pressure risk. And the more pressure we have in those blood vessels, the more likely we are to have damage occur. Um, and that's why we tend to see a lot of damage at the bifurcation points, or where the blood vessels go, because it's just the way it tends to work out in the body. Um, so we can see how that could, if we damage the blood vessel, that could lead to plaque formation, and then that could lead to heart attack, stroke, etc. And then statins, they're used a lot of times for high cholesterol and people that have heart disease. Again, we talked about this in that cholesterol series. Highly recommend going to the nnt.com. NNT is numbers needed to treat, and you can type in different medications, and it'll have different criteria for things. So like with cholesterol and the statins, it'll talk about people that with known heart disease and the studies there, people without known heart disease, people with a previous heart attack, and give you how many people it takes to treat to prevent a heart attack, prevent a stroke, and how many people you need to treat before there's adverse events, negative side effects from it. For the statins, a lot of times those negatives tend to come, but then like just treating 10 to 50 people to prevent, a heart attack or a stroke, it tends to be more like you have to treat, 50 to 200 to prevent that one. Whereas again, you're getting that, one injured in 10 or 50, so somewhere in that range. So that's not a very good ratio. You'd rather the benefits be, like 1 in 10 versus 1 in 200. Um, but statins can impact things. They can lead to different things that increase blood sugar. They can also decrease nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is important because it's a vasodilator. So that means it's going to take that blood vessel and dilate it, so it's going to be wider, which can help decrease that blood pressure. So without the nitric oxide there, we're going to have more vasoconstriction. So again, smaller, more pressure. Um, and there's different things too that the statins will lead to the cells becoming more insulin resistant. So that's why we see a lot of times one of the side effects from those statin drugs are people becoming diabetic. So again, not necessarily the thing we want. So that gives you a little bit of information about insulin, kind of what it is, what insulin resistance is, and then there's some of the details on why it leads to different issues with the heart. And like Dickman said, it's kind of inseparable as far as heart disease goes. So hopefully this information was helpful. Like I said, through the next few videos, we'll go over different systems in the body, kind of how insulin impacts those. And then after that, we'll get into more of the practical application, what can you do about things. And so that's where it'll be helpful. Hopefully this information is helpful too. Sometimes being told, oh, go do X, Y, and Z, it's hard to do X, Y, and Z when you don't know why you're doing X, Y, and Z. And so that's why I like to give some of this information. I'm also nerdy. I like just the information and I like learning about different things, but I also want the practical part. So, just having information to have information, I don't really like. But give me the information and give me how to kind of apply it in practical sense. Uh, that's that's when things really work out well. So that's what we're trying to do here. Give you some of the information, some of the why behind it, and then that way when we get to that practical side, it'll make a lot more sense and hopefully be easier to do. But thanks guys for watching. Please like and subscribe. It would help to grow the channel. The goal is to get this information out to people so that we can help people be healthier and have a better quality of life. And so if you hit like and subscribe, maybe they can get it to more people and accomplish that goal. So I'd appreciate it. If you have questions, let me know. Until next time, guys, take care. Bye.